Okay, so there are some housekeeping items that we wanted to just make sure folks went over, particularly if you missed the last session or two. The first being just a reminder that we have been we had an item that we originally had scheduled for the discussion today for governance, and then on our last governance call, we decided, okay, it's a kind of more of a technical nature. It will result eventually in an impending governance decision, but that it might make sense to use our profiling call that happened last week to start going through it. So I wanted to do just a little bit of a reminder. I know, Thomas, you had asked about it last week. We do have the deck from that discussion and the recording from that discussion where we start to talk through, okay, what is this additional mechanism that we might want to put into our guidelines for use section, and we might want to make a decision on about how we use it and have that formalized through a governance decision. So our next steps coming out of that, I think we need at least one more round in profiling based on what folks are thinking, to provide like some examples to help us evaluate a potential pattern for use before it would come back, I think, to the governance call for a decision on whether or not, you know, we start writing up and incorporating it into our guidelines. So the ask was just as homework to familiarize yourself with that content. The initial description, definitions, potential patterns are described in these two materials. And then we'll reconvene for our next profiling call next week to start talking through some of our scenarios on that front. The other piece I wanted to cover in our kind of housekeeping. So we have had the item around URI OID registry, like a number of kind of topic items that have come up in some of our past calls. One of the things that we had raised on the HL7 Canada call earlier was like a need to actually have like a dedicated session around this. So we have time on the HL7 Canada community call that's upcoming on October 3rd to have the community start bringing forward the outstanding questions that have come up. We had some come up in our last governance call around type exclusivity and overlap, but any additional questions that you might have or thoughts on, you know, challenges or considerations that you would like to discuss with the overall community for some consensus on, please come to the October 3rd meeting. I think we're going to try to get Lloyd McKenzie on as a potential like technical subject matter expert, particularly in the URI OID space. So if there are technical questions our community has, we can potentially that have answers. Ideally, we can get them on that call. We're still waiting on confirmation from him, but our goal is just to basically give a space for a more dedicated discussion around this topic. What else? Okay, so that's housekeeping. The agenda items highlighting for this session. We have a kind of, we had something come through in the last couple of days from, you know, folks who were trying to implement and depend on our package for the CA baseline. They brought up an issue that we had discussed in governance and kind of gone over options in the past and thought we had resolved, but that continues, I guess, to be an issue in utilizing the package with specific respect to us including references to extensions that aren't defined in our project and aren't defined in other projects, like in ways that the tooling can find. So that's, I think, a topic area where I think we need to come to kind of a short term. What are we going to do in the meantime? Are there other people experiencing these issues? And you know, how do we make a decision now that acknowledges our past governance decisions to do things like socialize these extensions? So I think that will be a good conversation. I don't want to lose time at the end to go over, I think, another piece that's kind of come out of these recent issue log requests is how we deal with the challenge of, you know, our impending issue log of things that we've been able to discuss, but like we don't have any fellow editors that are in place today that are helping to kind of get through the log. And I think we need to think about this from a maintenance and a viability standpoint. If we're hearing from the community as they start to use things and adding to that issue log, that we that we address that upcoming volume in a more proactive manner. Were there anything else that folks wanted to see on the agenda today, specifically related to kind of the governance topics? Okay. All right. So this is a semi-technical conversation today, though I think we need to stay focused on kind of what are the formal decisioning practices around it, and how do we resolve this challenge around ownership in a consistent way moving forward. So I'm going to bring up, I've got one of the issues that was sent in by Lloyd when he was attempting to use and create a dependency on the package. And so I'll pull it up just to provide folks with the initial context, and then we can kind of dig in. So there is challenges with utilizing the package, the most recent package of the CA baseline, when referencing extensions. In this case, it's defined in Prescribe It, but I think there are some others that are also defined or referenced in our profiles, but defined or not defined elsewhere. And because they're not packaged up in a FHIR package or available on a registry, what that effectively looks like is a challenge for our downstream users, and actually errors that we're seeing, that everyone is seeing on the profile itself when you go to review. For instance, this is our medication dispense profile. So we knew we always had this question of, do we do we reference extensions in our profiles that are published elsewhere? Like, how do we make decisions about which ones we do socialize and to what degree? But we really, and we decided there was value in publishing, or I shouldn't say publishing, in referencing extensions that came from other guides that would provide implementers a sense of what is being actively used on the ground. So for that reason, and I'll zoom on just a little bit so you guys can kind of see what I'm seeing. We did include, and we have formal tickets where we made decisions to apply these extensions that were actioned in the community. They're really just socialized, right? There's no must support, there's no minimum cardinality. And when it comes to our JSON, really the only thing that we're doing is just saying, this is an extension that we're creating this kind of reference to. Here is the URL for that extension. So in our project, we don't have, or we shouldn't have, that extension defined, I don't believe. Let me see. Yeah. We have medication strength, but we don't have the is representative.
Are you displaying, Sheridan? Sorry.
Oh, are you guys not seeing this?
Oh, we're seeing your CA baseline content browser.
Sorry, let me stop sharing and share again. My File Explorer or
Yeah, just Explorer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, File
Okay.
Explorer.
Whoops.
Yes.
Okay, I will. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, let me jump back then. So here is that original. Here's that original, essentially the ticket that came in. I'll put it in the chat so you folks can see it. Here is the profile that it's applied on. So we can see, oh, it's actually dispense. So this was the error I was referring to when I said, not only is it potentially creating a challenge for folks that are trying to leverage it via a packaging dependency, but it's also showing up to our folks that are reviewing our content, and all because effectively what we've done is just indicated on medication dispense, there's an extension that might be used that we're socializing, and here's the URL for that extension. But because there isn't an extension that is published in the FHIR registry at this with this URL, our renderers like Simplifier and our tools like the validators and the IG publishers are creating problems for downstream users. So I think the challenge that we have is that we've had decisions and discussions in the past around, you know, whether or not we include these, and the decision was there was value in socializing them. And now we have a problem that's coming up from our community that's basically saying you should remove them or you should figure out how to solve this problem. And we always felt like that we didn't want to necessarily recreate the extension under our URL because we aren't really the host or the author or the governor of this content. And also because there are folks that would be familiar with this content at its originating extension URL, but the problem still remains. And so we're sitting kind of at this impasse of kind of technical meets governance, which is we said that we wanted to do this, but it actually makes it harder to use. And from the perspective of how we tackle it in the governance side of things, I think we need to come to a short-term and potentially a long-term decision on, you know, how do we walk back potentially something that we've kind of already decided in the past, or do we walk back something we've decided in the past?
Duplicating extensions from, say, the prescribed IT package into the baseline, I think is a maintenance headache waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Now, the ideal thing is figuring out how projects like Prescribe It can publish and or register their extensions so that others can reference them. Because that's because as it is even now with the where we have it, you can't go and look up what the structure of the rendered doses instruction extension is with the information we've got, right? So we put it there. We've sort of said this is something that's useful to use, but we can't look up the definition of it. So one of the governance questions here, and I think this came up in a previous call, would be how and when are extensions basically limited to the project, and when should they be lifted up to a more common usage space so they're more easily referenceable, which, you know, mirrors the discussion we were talking about with URIs before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is the implementation guide that contains these extensions accessible outside the project?
So I think it depends on how you define accessible, because the challenge that I actually had too is in reading the guidance on defining and using extensions. Like there's kind of, I don't know, I read it as competing guidance. So let me find it.
Now, of course, there's been some changes in the last 6 months where we moved extensions, like the core spec, international spec extensions, we moved them all into a separate IG so that they could sort of live on their own life cycle separate from the base spec.
So this is, I'm in R4 right now. And
Yeah.
when Lloyd originally said, because Lloyd's comment was actually, this is not a legal practice. And so I was like, okay, well, let's examine that. Let's
Which this?
that essentially, hold on, let me get his exact words from our issue. That posting and referencing a extension that are not defined in our iGuide and not inherited from any dependency in another iGuide.
So that what that would say is that you should have a dependency on the prescribed iGuide in order to be able to reference them.
But there isn't a prescribed iGuide package in any of the package registries.
Well, that's a problem.
So my thinking is, because we've known like there is this problem and that we have like this weird place as an end user, but not always somebody who has the ability to control the artifacts we need to use. The first thing I want to confirm is like, is this statement, I think, is it true and impacting other folks? And do we interpret this concern around kind of legality and what we're allowed to do the same way? Because, so I read two distinct things in the R4 extensibility details. So I see the structure definitions for the extension should be available for consumers of an instance. The preferred mechanisms for achieving this availability are the direct resolvability of the at the extension's canonical URL or publishing the extension definition on a registry that is available, right? Like Lorraine, you mentioned, and known to the systems that will be consuming. But this is a should statement. When you go into defining extensions, which is, I think it's here. Like, so at at this point in time, I'm thinking, okay, well, it seems like more like a recommendation, which would imply that maybe the tooling is overexerting itself on our utilization of this. Because
I think the tooling is expecting it to be a shall, not a should.
yeah, but
Oh.
when I look at this, and I don't know, maybe this is different from the practices that you guys have employed in your guides. But I see before extensions can be used in instances, their definition shall be published. And so it's, I don't know how to, if that changes our interpretation.
So, but in this case, we're talking about something different. One is a downstream implementation guide referencing an existing extension, which is what we were talking about on the previous page. And this one is about when you're creating an instance to send into a registry. So not the profile, the actual instance of the resource.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the assertion here is that before you can actually use it, it's got to be defined somewhere where people can look it up. To my point, we had that extension we just looked at. We know what the extension definition is, but we can't go and look at the structure and see if it contains nothing more than a customized value set or contains a complex data type, because we can't see the definition of the extension. And so that's so those are two, they're opposite sides of the same coin.
Do you think that we inherit some expectation of this if we are putting forward an extension for use, knowing that its definition isn't published in a registry?
I mean, it doesn't have to be one of these two registries, right? It could be Simplifier, it could be Prescribed IT could maintain a server, etc. But it's getting the point of being able to get the definition extension that you're sending in is sort of crucial to effectively using the extension.
So then,
because if you don't know what the structure is, how are you dealing with it?
And I think it's common for us in our implementations just to say, well, I know where this lives and I can go and look, like the human process of going and looking up what the definition is. But the challenge is that what we're seeing in play and what's creating a challenge for our end users is one of the mechanical variety.
Yeah, well, I'm not even sure I could go, are those URLs from Prescribe It open, that the human can look at them? That any human?
You're saying like, are they resolvable at their URL?
Yeah,
No, I don't believe so. Let me see. I think they
They go to prescribe it.
yeah. So we'll just confirm. Yeah. Now you could type, for humans that are typing it into Google, you can access, the published releases that are they're done in the format that's just doesn't develop the TGZ file. But kind of coming back to our challenge, which is like, we cannot force anyone that has hosted or that has extensions that we've socialized in the past to go through this process. And I think if for some of these we've already said, okay, there's this value to lifting up into a common space, what do we do for a near-term solution? Like, do we reconsider whether or not they should be lifted up into a common space based on whether or not their definitions can be found?
well, we hit some of these kind of challenges on some of the US guides before too, right? What we've done is we've defined things that we would really like to be used beyond a specific project, more across the domain space, but we've defined it buried inside a specific project. And then decided to try to use that in a common way. So that's part of the key governance question. But in terms of the tooling and the rendering, Lloyd is right about not being able to reference extensions that you don't have a package dependency on.
Mhm.
Now, if Prescribe It would publish a package, that would solve some of the issues, right?
But
I
then
don't
we're
like to use
dependent on the
the
whole
word
package.
publish because that's not what we mean. But issue a package so the package dependencies can be built against it.
But then we
'Cause I
might
think
be
what-
dependent on the whole package, and we might not want to do that.
Well, you
Just for
either
the sake of the extensions.
well, yes, but they could I'm trying not to use the word publish because it's not the same thing. They could produce a package of just the extensions.
Mhm. Yeah.
If that's what they wanted to do. But we do actually, when we first started looking at this, however many moons ago, everyone was looking at it from the human readable spot. And now that we're actually trying to use this stuff in the real world, we need to be able to manage, like any other software product, manage dependencies and relationships and be able to get computable definitions. And so how we make decisions about what goes where and what gets approved and what is local and what is not, I think that's the core governance question.
Do you think like our decision for whether to lift them up or maintain them as lifted up in our common space should be limited or time boxed to things that we know, like to this requirement where there has to be a package available for the extensions by this date?
Yeah, I think the most pragmatic answer, frankly, is to get Prescribe It to create a package, not necessarily publish, because we've been conflating publishing and packaging. I'm going to try to stop doing that. to create a package that can be put in the package registry, and that can be referenced so that those extension resolutions resolve. That's the most direct solution. Now, then deciding what we want to live where, that's a mid to longer term discussion. I don't know. I've been talking too much. Other people should weigh in.
Do other folks think that like we should have a cutoff date? Given that like by not having a cutoff date on these types of requirements, we are preventing folks from utilizing the CA baseline the way they need to. Or do we think that we maintain our decisions and wait indefinitely until this is resolved? And that's when folks can start utilizing our packages.
First question is who is it that will resolve it? Because otherwise it's more than indefinite, it's almost infinite. Because a bunch of these conversations, I think, really do need to go into the discussions around the roadmap and how everything fits together, right?
And so I started to kind of put this as potentially an option for our long term, which is like, you know, so Lloyd had, this was a piece that we hadn't gotten to, had like talked about a potential technical solution that may or may not help us solve this, that allows for hosting the extension at a different base URL from, I think, where it was originally the base URL in RIG. I don't know if this is the way through versus something that's more straightforward, like an ask for, so Lorraine, you had mentioned it's not necessarily like I put in registry, but it's more like, is it like a process for ensuring content is packaged in respective guides? Like governance to enforce?
Yeah, well, give it an individual project is going to be thinking about packaging their stuff for other projects necessarily. So then the governance question is, when we want to use something from an individual project, what's the communication and governance process to request that they make it available? Now, a lot of the like DaVinci stuff is it's all packaged in the registry so everybody can reference it. So I don't know, we're between a rock and a hard place if we just leave it up to the ether to decide.
I think that what we have to look at is that if we're going to try and use an extension that's in a situation like this one is, either they've got to be putting it up into the registry of some sort, of our extension registry, or we've got to put it up there and it becomes ours to maintain as pseudo governors or whatever of that thing. Because if we can't sit there and wait for somebody external to do it who has, from their point of view, as we just said, there's really no motivation for them to do it. Because if they don't care whether it's registered in their registry so anybody else can use it. They got no motivation to put the work in to put it there nor maintain it once it is there. So I'm kind of leaning towards the point of we have to have some kind of registry like we have with our URI registry where the things are put in there. And if they're in there, we can use it. And if it's not in there, either you create a new one and add it, or talk to the people who own it and say, are you going to put it in there, kind of thing, with a relatively short window. And if, like within a few weeks or whatever period, you can't get hold of them, can't get an answer from them, then it's something we go ahead and put it up there for our stuff and put it as available for everybody. Because until it's in a registry like that, we're going to have this problem all over the place. And with people not having motivation to register it for themselves, for their own use, you're going to have lots of stuff that you'll want to use that's never going to get registered.
And as HL7 International has seen, you start ending up with proliferation of duplicates.
So that's why we kind of need this registry. It says it's real, it exists. It may be in a, how do you say, a draft state or a authoring state or whatever we call it, but at least it's there, so is findable and stuff. Because if it's not even in that authoring state, you're just essentially looking up somebody else's word of mouth and trying to say, well, we'll use this word of mouth process in our standard, and that's kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies when you start thinking about it.
Well, at least in Simplifier, that's what we did. That's what we decided to use as our registry. Whether we packaged a set of structures so they're referenceable is slightly different than the draft authoring published status sort of on the public piece. So it's almost like the difference between FMN levels and just using structure definition. So it's that we could still package extensions that are in the authoring phase, but people would need to know what their status is.
And when you say we could still package, do we mean like, you mean from the CA baseline, or you mean like if a central kind of extension registry existed in Canada?
Either way, I mean, you could still package, the project could still package them if they were willing to.
Realistically, I think you have to package from a project point of view simply because of timeline and stuff, because otherwise you're stuck waiting for somebody else who, again, gets the situation that they're done with what they need, they're not going to do anymore. And you're waiting on them packaging. So you make a package for your profile or for your project that has it the way you want. And you have to be aware when the source one gets updated that you may have to redo your package.
Yeah, well, and of course you reference a package with a specific version. The other thing is that I think we need to start looking at all of the initiatives we're trying to move forward with at least some coordination. And I know that's supposed to be coming with the roadmap rather than on a project by project basis. Because now we're trying to cross-pollinate like between the work, which is a good thing, but it needs some direction.
Do we think that in the meantime, is it better to keep and not repackage in the baseline, or is it better to remove and apply a note on the reason it was removed, the fact that it does exist, and the fact that there is a desire for this to be managed more procedurally?
I would defer to the people who understand the domain content in our medication baseline resources, because the extension was brought in because they thought it was needed, I presume. So the remove, recreate, how do we deal with it is, I think we certainly need the advice of the people who understand the requirements of the content area.
What do others think? So my feeling is that like if we have at least their kind of original driving reasons for why these were included. Like, thank God for the fact that we capture these in our issue logs. But, you know, originally, I think a lot of these weren't introduced in the beginning definitions of the CA baseline. They were more included after we established a practice that we would identify during our due diligence reviews of other guides specific extensions that were present that we thought had reusability for outside of that particular project, and made a decision on a case-by-case basis during the due diligence review for which ones were socialized. So the practice was established by governance. It was enacted by the profiling team that were going through the due diligence reviews. And so I think, like, we know that information.
Yeah, but we did a shortcut. So you just said we did a due diligence review, and we were looking for things that could be reusable or more commonly used. And we tried to, rather than put it in a commonly accessible spot, we tried to just point at the originating project.
I think I'm pretty sure we made a formal decision not to redefine the extension definition in our project.
Yeah. I support that part, but we didn't provide a common space for them to lift it up and where we could both use it. That's the difference.
So what do others think about how we resolve this? I mean, do we just boot this back over the profiling stream and say, tell us what to do? And if we can't come to a decision, we can't repackage and it cannot be used by other implementers?
So I think just put an extension as a placeholder. That's maybe the easy way. You put an extension as a placeholder and put a reference any. If there's no more requirements, and you either just reference other extension or build an extension, put in the package, and depends on user their preference and based on their business model requirements, they can add in anytime, just like a Lego building blocks, they can chip in anytime. But the extension say there is a standard, or we can put the slice there as well. The size extension depends on the different business requirements, do their building block work.
So,
But then you'd have to have a status for it.
Well, that's depends on the use case to do the job.
So Thomas, are you saying that basically, like, remove the, so I'll just go to the JSON because it's so much easier. So in our differential, are you saying like remove this explicit extension, this explicit URL for this extension, and like somewhere on extension note that there are potential extensions that we're attempting to socialize, but not actually have them defined?
Generic, make it more generic, and make it as optional. So any actual implementer come here, they can do this work by themselves. You will just put a placeholder there and extension with a reference. And now you can slice it if you want, but that's make it more complicated. You get extension.
Yeah, I think it
With
would
the
also
kernel.
impact like how the instances had to be formed.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you
That's
did
the-
that, how do you know what the structure of the intended
Mhm.
extension is?
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's definitely up to the use case, because actually that's you just type, chip in the two, how to see a concept. It's dimension variability. Another one, just how to handle the instance, and which comes from each individual profiles. That's a really, really very rabbit hole oriented questions, and so far it's still at least my struggling with it right now.
So the other sort of in-between approach, I think, might be that if we can't actually create a package dependency for a given extension, that there be a page for that domain area that says, and it could be broader than just prescribe it. These are known extensions that a downstream developer might wish to use, and point them at them, and then they can decide whether, how they bring them in. At least then people know what the structure of it is. I don't know, I'm trying to brainstorm here, so that might be a stupid idea, but
It's a good idea. And it's just use some descriptive words and to tell the downstream implementers some kind of example there. And for extension, for any resource in the FHIR, they will go to class model perspective, public, accessible, or private. And I don't think that there's protected type there. And either you publish it and then go to canonic URL to access to dereference that specific resources, or you just keep it as private and nobody can access it outside your package. So in that manner, there's always identification question, and up to each implementer to decide. It's out of control, and in that manner, for other implementers, if you really want to bring in existing extension in, you can ask that implementer A, say, could you publish it, make it public available, or could you allow me just copy your extension, put in my package, use it as a private class?
yeah, the last one is what gives everybody heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. So as the person who has to like make a change, I tend to be more in favor of something like this. I think like if there are things that are outside of our control, but they are impacting the things that are directly inside of our control, that the solution is to remove the thing that's a problem, indicate through human guidance that there is a desire to do this, but this is the scenario we live under, and hope that it contributes to the resolution of said problem and re-exploration of its introduction. But I feel like I'm at an impasse if we don't remove this, that we have to solve a really big problem for us to be usable at all. That I think the solution is to remove it, which is pretty straightforward, and to ensure that it doesn't get lost, but to resolve the technical challenge that we have.
I just wonder, Shirley, could you do me a favor? Still try to understand that the last option here need a long-term solution to maybe possible publish extensions from a different URI in our IG and across your URI function through the boundary would have to be explored. What does mean actually from your perspective?
I am not actually, I did a little bit of reading before this. I think Lloyd is referencing that the tooling community is working on how you reference extensions that are hosted across different versions, and that will result potentially in an improvement in our infrastructure for how we reference extensions that exist across other IGs. I don't think that it solves, like, this is a very naive answer because I haven't done that much reading into it. I was hoping someone might have been more familiar with it. I don't know if it does resolve our issue if the underlying secondary host of the IG never publishes it to a registry. It was something that Lloyd brought up and I wanted to expose it to the group. But I think what we need to make a decision on is like, do we need a long-term solution known and in place for us to enact a short-term solution, which is do something technical, I don't know yet, or remove it and indicate to our users these are the extensions that we've previously been socialized. This is where you can find them, but here is a consideration because they aren't currently published, assuming that this does not happen. But like, I can't go in it, I can't make that decision on my own. These are not my technical artifacts, so I can't, like, I need the direction of the governance group to say, we need an answer by this date and before we make this change. Because if I make it, I'm making it on my interpretation of what's right. And like, that's a problem.
I don't know what's the relation between the prescribed and with the baseline community, but my understanding, sometimes we have to go to the rough way. Well, may not that easy to make decision. We have to reinvent the view. If that's really high business demand there, and we have to recreate that extension, put inside with a different URI, URL, whatever. And also be minded and in the descriptive sentence, and if there's any possibility for downstream implementers, they utilize this profile to have an interaction with a prescribed profile, and they might think about adding the second URI inside it to reference to there, and because in that manner, the prescribed URI will be visible in that interaction.
So you're saying it's guidance to maintain to users around, okay, we've socialized these extensions and you should utilize the original prescribed URI when referencing them yourself.
You know, this is really tough. I don't want to go that avenue, actually. It's very tough, and they all try to keep the URI, you know, single or uniform, but sometimes, and one resource might have to have multiple URI point too. That's really bringing quite a lot of confusion. But if it roll back to my previous suggestion, just go to the universal placeholder as an extension, give us some descriptive paragraph, and then put some extension in the package or kind of point to some other profiles. Might be making things a little bit easier, but up to the implementer decide how to go that way, because I can sense from Lloyd there might be URI service being provided somehow.
So I think we can make this ask. If we make this ask to the prescribed team and we don't hear anything, when do we execute a change? Because part of Lloyd's question was also, as an end user, when can we expect an update to our to your package that would allow us to use it? So basically, if we don't get an answer and we don't set a date today or some other time, then we will just persistently not be able to be used. So is there anyone that's against me saying that if we don't get an answer in the next month, the October 27th, that we would execute a temporary removal with an indication that our reason for removal, the presence and our decisions on the extensions in the past, but like that it's a known issue for folks who are utilizing this instance that is still unresolved. Would anyone be against that time blocking?
No.
Okay. Okay. On if or when it will be resolved. '27th, 2023. proceed with temporary, and I am saying temporary because I'm not saying like we put it to bed, but we have to remove it in order to like keep moving. And have something that's useful in the meantime. Okay, so I'll put the question to, I have to find the contact points from the prescribe it guide to see if this, I think the recommendation around like just package the extensions might be a helpful one that hopefully is a little bit easier to stomach. Because it prevents us from going down the rabbit hole on other options. So we can still talk about, I think, what a long-term solution is, I think in the future, but like it does bring me back to, I think, the second item that I want to raise for folks. We don't have a ton of time, but it is something I want to prioritize on one of our next governance calls, which is we currently have 42 community issue log items. So this was one of them. We've had some more uptick recently, which is great as folks try to use it. It's great that they submit tickets and they tell us what needs to change and what they'd like, what makes it more usable. But, you know, after we've started applying our statuses and filtering based off of like what we've made decisions on, I think it's become like really clear that we used to have co-editors and people who were publishing to our GitHub repository the changes or requested changes. I don't think we've had another co-editor in like 24 months. Actually, you know what? Someone from Finland did actually put in a pull request for a minor typo, but we had no one from our community that's assisting on this. This list is growing, and it's growing to the point where we have even things that we've made decisions on, but because it's entirely a volunteer effort, like there just isn't enough time in the day for one person who has more than a full-time job to make these changes. And so I think what we need to do is think about, like, is there a way to proceduralize some of these things or to lean on and have some responsibility from some of our fellow contributors on executing these changes? Because like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, none of these in our current state changes would be made, and we might be able to talk through some of these, but we don't really have any escalation procedure for how some of this burden is shared. And that ultimately, when we think about how do we use the CA baseline and how do we confirm its validity and its maturity in the community and its like viability as a stable artifact, putting that on one person as an editor, I think is a challenge to that statement. So I think we'll have to have a more dedicated conversation coming up, and I'd ask for folks to kind of brainstorm maybe ways that you've seen other folks do this to manage like a more consistent release schedule, a more consistent contribution schedule, because I think we're now kind of hitting that point where like we're not getting through enough changes to meet with the demand of the ones that are coming in, or the demand of the ones that have been sitting in our log for a while.
But is it meeting the demand of the changes, or is it just updating the changes?
So you mean like as requests come in, are
Yeah, so as the requests come in and they're documented, are there the discussions happening in a decision log that records this and these just aren't being updated? Or is it that other process of actually discussing these?
it's both. Yeah,
Okay.
it's really both. That like we haven't been able to, like, even I think in the last month or 2 months, we had like another 5 come through. Now on profiling and governance, we've been off of the community issue log for a number of months now. But even so, like, there are a number of these that, like the ones that we've even discussed, that it's hard to keep up with. So this ready for applied, there's 11 here. These are changes, some of them related to the, I think, extensions we've been talking about. That the group has made decisions on. There's documented like action items and confirmation that this is what we'll be doing, but they just haven't been applied. So it's really both. So we should probably think about it from both perspectives. Which is like, how do we use the profiling stream more dedicated to go through these and come to a decision on them? Particularly on ones that like we might have started discussion on, but we haven't been able to come to a conclusion. I think that speaks to like needing better governance practice to drive towards a decision so that we aren't just always putting a bunch of things on the back burner for like requires further input from community. So I'd be really curious. I think brainstorming between now and then having a really nice dedicated call to talk through this particular challenge will hopefully be more than just sanity building, but actually contribute to our maintainability over time. What you guys love,
Well,
homework.
Yes, but the other piece of this may be as InfoWay and the provinces move forward with the roadmap planning is requesting some resource assistance from the jurisdictions that need this material and are working on it. Now, that's not our thing to do, but that's something that InfoWay could consider.
So let's document like, you know, ideas like that starting next time and kind of explore kind of what the variations might look like. Maybe talk about what we would anticipate like volumes to typically look like. So that we're not shutting any doors on how to keep this thing going over time. Because we were like, I feel like it was quiet for a really long time. We weren't hearing from folks and we were kind of like slowly working through. And then we heard from like 3 distinct implementers and kind of got behind. Okay. All right. Well, I'll leave you folks with that. All the brainstorming that we'll do over the weekend. And I will chat with, I think we're still going to have our profiling call. I know it's going to be a long weekend, but we'll still have a profiling call next Friday for those that are interested. Yeah, I like the Thomas, yeah, getting the winning lottery ticket. I just saw that in the chat. Although maybe that would open me up to be indefinitely available to make change log requests, changes to the baseline. All right, thanks folks.